Charlie and Tess, and it's by Martin Hall and Catherine Walters. It was spring and lambing time high up in the dark mountains. The weather was still cold and a blizzard was raging, so the farmer was out tending his flock. The farmer stopped and listened. What was that? A little plaintive, bleating cry. It was a tiny lamb, alone and hungry. My, you're a small one, he said. Can't find your mother, eh? Never mind, you come home with me. In the farm kitchen, the farmer's little daughter, Emily, made the lamb a cosy nest from a cardboard box and some old jumpers. He was very weak, but was soon hungrily suckling warm milk from a bottle with a teat on it. Let's call him Charlie, said Emily. Then, because they could find no ewe to look after him, Charlie became the family's own special pet and lived with them in the farmhouse. The farmer had a sheepdog called Tess, and as soon as Charlie was able to skip and frisk around in the farmyard, Tess was there to look after him. She made sure he did not stray too far from home and led him back there when it was time to eat. And when Charlie was too old for the milk bottle, Tess showed him all the best pastures to graze in. All the time Charlie grew quickly. He was soon too big for the kitchen, so he slept outside in Tess's kennel. It was a tight squeeze, but the sheepdog and the lamb didn't mind, for they were friends and they kept each other warm. They played together when Tess was not working. The farmer would throw a ball and watch them both chase it. Charlie was slower than Tess, of course, but sometimes she would let him win. Sometimes I wonder if Charlie's turning into a dog, the farmer's wife said, as the family watched him one day. Charlie even had his own collar and lead. When the farmer's wife took Emily down to the village with Tess, Charlie would go as well. The people in the shops would laugh and point as Charlie walked proudly along the road, carrying a newspaper in his mouth. All too soon, Charlie grew too big for the kennel. It was time for him to join the other sheep up on the mountainside. Charlie missed his adopted family. Tess was lonely as well without her friend, and cried by her kennel. Never mind, old girl, soothed the farmer. We'll see Charlie soon enough when we have to move the flock into a new pasture. That was when the trouble started. When the farmer and Tess came to move the sheep to a new field, Charlie wanted to help. Charlie, go back to the other sheep, laughed the farmer. But Charlie was determined to round up the sheep with Tess, and the farmer had to push him back to the flock again. This went on all summer because Charlie thought he was a sheepdog. Summer turned to autumn, and then it was nearly winter again. Charlie sniffed the air. It reminded him of a long time ago when he was lost and alone and cold. The sky filled with clouds, the colour of slate. It grew colder and colder as the wind blew. The sheep huddled together, but there was little shelter. Then it began to snow. Charlie barred anxiously. Light snow began to settle on his fleece. Where was Tess? Where was the farmer? If they didn't come soon, the snow would bury the whole flock. At the edge of a steep slope, he looked down. He could just see the farm, but the blizzard had already been there and covered everything. Charlie felt very frightened. Indeed, for now Tess and the farmer would not be able to reach them. The snow blew into the sheep's eyes and stung them with cold. Some of the weaker ones could barely walk through the thickening snow. Charlie knew that they all must move down into the valley before it was too late. Charlie ran ahead of the flock, but they stood stock still, for they thought only a sheepdog could round them up. Luckily, Charlie knew exactly what to do. He baaed loudly. He ran back and butted them and pulled their fleeces with his teeth. He raced backwards and forwards until the flock began to move all the way down the mountainside to the shelter. Many hours later, the storm died down and a low sun shone orange across the snow-covered hills. The farmer was at last able to go out and search for his flock. He paused for a moment, looking up. "I'm really worried. I don't know if we will be able to find them," he said to Tess. "The snow must be even deeper up there." Tess ran on ahead. The farmer pushed on a little way and then stopped. "What was that noise?" "Just the wind." He shook his head. "It must have been." As he began to struggle up the mountainside, Tess started barking and tugging at his trousers with her teeth. "What have you found, girl?" he asked. Look, there's some foxes there as well. Tess led the way down again, along a thin path through some large rocks. At the end of the path, the farmer stood, amazed. All of the flock was safely gathered there in a sheltered hollow. "This must have been you, Charlie," he said. "You really are a sheepdog after all." "Woof," Tess agreed. "Bah," said Charlie proudly. And that's the end.